Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. And this week, we're back doing another anime, and we're doing a hell of a big named one. And I rewatched it 20 some years later. This still holds up. As one can imagine, I have a lot to talk about when it comes to Ghost in the Shell. There's no possible way I can really describe what Ghost in the Shell has done for anime in general. I'm guessing really what it boils down to is when the movie came out, and yes, this is specifically talking about the TV show, the anime from the 2000s, but you can't understate just how big of an influence Ghost in the Shell had. Because without Ghost in the Shell, the Wachowskis wouldn't have sat there and gone totally apeshit with The Matrix. And a lot of the concepts and a lot of the things that we see in stuff like Psycho-Pass is directly influenced by Ghost in the Shell. A lot of futuristic things that, hard sci-fi can do. And I know that we're definitely nearing 2030, and I don't know if we're specifically where the technology in 2030 is, but I'd say that's true for any medium. I don't think we ever got those lacing shoes from back in the future, those free lacing shoes. They finally released them 5 years too late, that sort of thing. Microwave pizzas that make their own microwave oven and they're as good as DiGiorno's or whatever the fuck, that sort of thing. So Ghost in the Shell having people with plugs in their necks to do the thing and having an internet service in their head. It's like the codex from Metal Gear, same idea. We're not there yet. But again, for a show that does experiment in those things, and does show those things off, and does show off things like cybernetics, prosthetics, things like prosthetic limbs are nowhere near this. Full-on androids are nowhere near this. But it was a cool idea, even in the mid-90s, to go with it. And obviously influence from stuff like Terminator and other things before it. But Ghost in the Shell is one of those things where Japan was ahead of its time, and even today, even though not everything in the franchise is amazing, 2045, I'm looking at you, there's still this aura around the property that can't be understated. Sure, their movie didn't work out, and one day I will talk about it. I wanted to focus on the thing that I knew succeeded. Of course, the first movie itself sure did. I'm not disputing that, but for my money, the gold standard as far as Ghost in the Shell, if you're going to talk about the franchise, is the animated series. It was released in 2004 and 2006. And I was originally just going to do 2 parts and do Season 1, Season 2, but it turns out I was actually able to rewatch both in the time frame needed to actually get this review out. So I'm going to do my best. Hopefully I don't take all that long. The nice thing is, once you get the characters down, the characters themselves pretty much stay the same in both seasons. That's the benefit. So I can kind of dive right in, and I don't have to dive into every single thing that this show does, despite being a 52 episode anime. I will save the movies as separate entities. I will save 2045, whether it gets a second season or not. I'm sure it's going to at some point, but the initial word on 2045 was meh. I mean, it was great to have the original English dub cast back, and I will talk about that dub cast in a minute. It's one of my favorites of all time. But there are many good things and very few bad things about standalone Complex, and what it is able to achieve in that mid 2000s period is something that even holds up today. Things may go faster, things might look flashier, things might have more going for it, but there's still a place for something like this show. There's still a place for Ghost in the Shell. And I think the fact that the franchise can always kind of move its trajectory forward with the times and still seem relevant in any form, whether it's on Funimation's dollar, whether it's on Bang Zoom's dollar and Netflix and whatever, whomever has the license, you're still getting something interesting out of it, and you're going to get something interesting out of it, provided that they have a story to tell. And it's nice that they don't just keep making the thing just to make the thing. They try at least to do something with the advance of time and technology, where there's always going to be something to do with the nature of someone's ghost and the shell being the physical body that houses one's ghosts, one's mind, one's soul, one's whatever. And when looking back at Standalone Complex, it's a very philosophical show, not in the same sense as Ergo Proxy, because it's way more action-oriented and less kind of dystopian, but it's done in a procedural crime thriller detective show kind of way. So they have to balance out a lot of the high action stuff with a lot of the high end mind fuckery that the setting provides, because it is a hard sci-fi. A lot of this stuff could probably happen. Cyber warfare, prosthetic bodies that are basically just superhuman strength, and it's like varying degrees of what somebody's willing to go through and pay for and do this. And then of course you have the military aspect. People still have to have the military know-how to understand and fight against all these different issues that they're facing. So I did want to throw that out there as the intro before talking about the characters themselves and talking about the plot. And really what it boils down to is the characters themselves, because if you don't have an interesting set of core characters, well, why would you care what shenanigans they go in? Why would you care what enemies they face if the characters themselves aren't interesting? And what I like about this set of characters is they're more adult. Some of them are probably in their 30s or 40s or maybe even 50s and 60s in mental capacity. If they're in prosthetic bodies, you don't know what they look like, but they feel like an older, more mature set of people who have seen some shit. This would not work. And I think this is the thing that I think Psychopaths kind of gets wrong is, yeah, they're downtrodden people, and in certain cases you have the 30s to 40-year-old people that have been there, but it's mostly like 10, 15, 20, 30, They have some experience dealing with being prison inmates and shit, but Ghost in the Shell really focuses on hardened veterans from a lot of different wars, and they've advanced the time frame. They flash back 5, 10, 15 years in the past to really justify that these people have gone through this shit and are hardened to the point that they can deal with all of these threats, whether they're physical or psychological or cyber, and do them to their best ability. And again, Section 9 has been kind of the gold standard as far as these procedural drama things go. Again, Psychopaths does its job, but Section 9 just has this flair for it. And it's also like slightly comedic without being overdone. The thing that Ghost in the Shell does better than anything is being very self-serious. But ever so little moments, like near the ends of episodes, or just little in-jokes and being funny. But it's not meant to be funny in the sense of haha laugh funny. It's, oh, that was unexpected, that was a joke. And again, that comes with the territory of older people with older values, and the older I get, the more I can appreciate something like Standalone Complex and what it was going for. But when we talk about Section 9, we're talking about the elite of the elite. They can be snipers, they can be military analysts, they can be, cyber warfare specialists, they can be everything. They can be big punch-em dudes. And each one of them has their own special skills. I'm not going to talk about every member. There's like 8 or 9 of them. I'll talk about the main few and what makes them so special. And of course, Ghost in the Shell really revolves around Motoko Kusanagi, the Major. And in the English version of Standalone Complex, she's voiced by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. And I've talked about, my fondness for voice actors, and I go to the cons and I, talk to voice actors and such and whatever. And I've never, said who my favorite was. I mean, you have people like Yuri Lowenthal, you Crispin Freemans, your Steve Blooms and whatnot, and all really fucking good. Johnny Young Bosch. But for my money, my favorite voice actor on the planet is Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. So much so that another actor even said, if he, I asked him point blank, if you could switch your voice with anybody's, have their same, vibe and skill, who would you choose? And he said Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, because she was the Major for Standalone Complex, the Standalone Complex movie, the 2045 redo, which came out last year, and subsequent movies until Funimation took the license in the early 2010s. She owns that role. I mean, Mimi Woods is fine. I believe it's Mimi Woods who did the original voice, but there's just something off about how she's just very stiff as a character. And I don't know if that's her I don't think that's her acting skill. I think that's what she brought to the character. But Mary Elizabeth McGlynn was Julia from Cowboy Bebop. She was Helba from Dot Hack. She's been in countless other things. She's done music stuff for Silent Hill off and on. She was in one of the remakes of Silent Hill 2 and 3. So I know her stuff really well, and what I think really drives home the Major for me is she has this allure and charisma that everybody responds to. She has an authority, and it comes across. But she's not stiff and robotic. The thing that I think Mary Elizabeth McGlynn does great is she has this authoritative voice that can be dramatic when spots. She can scream her nuts. Well, she doesn't have any, but you get what I'm saying. The phrase scream their nuts off or scream their voice off, scream their head off, that sort of thing. Bad choice of words. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. She as an actor can do pretty much any voice and any style, any way she wants to do it, and it comes across when she has to. When she wants to threaten a dude in one of the episodes, I think there was an episode about stealing organs and shit. She corners a dude in an alleyway with a fucking knife and says, I'm going to break your body and sell your parts and spare parts for buku bucks on the black market. You feel that she's really there threatening your ass. And then she has those moments of uncertainty, or she's fucking around with Bato at the end of episodes thinking, okay, this is a tender moment. But she has a sense of who she is. She doesn't lead the team, but she leads the team on operations. But she has deference for Chief Aramaki, almost in a sort of love interest kind of way. But she's not a love interest to them, but she loves Bato too. So she has to do all these crazy things. This character and this actress have to do all these crazy things to get across this authoritative voice, but an understanding quality that she's not perfect, but at the same time is self-assured in who she is enough that when she breaks, it feels wrong. She's always in control of the situation, and when she's not, when it matters, you really think, she broke. What the fuck does everybody else do? But then she's always able to bring it back, and this differing emotion and just feel to this character. I mean, the Major is probably my favorite character I've ever experienced in an anime, and it helps that she's voiced by my favorite actress. So there's so much going on with this character that has to have all of these competing interests, but you have to have an actress that isn't like just robotic for the sake of robotic or over expressive. It's very subtle, but when she's able to change who she is to suit the moment, but never lose sight of being a character, she's not schizophrenic. It's a character that makes sense and holds this show together. It's a futuristic show by means, and the major, this super high-end prosthetic body, super a hacker, super commanding officer of this military operation, stealth, she obliterates anything in her way, but she doesn't come across as infallible. She has the infallibility of a human being, where in moments where it matters, villains can get the drop on her, but she's always able to combat that, so it's not like she is impossible to beat. And that's, again, why that character is such a big part of this. But at the same time, you can't just have the Major. You can't have the Major just be a thing. I think that was one of the main problems with the movie, was they focused solely on the Major and thought that could carry it. Well, you need characters around her to carry the load. And the benefit of having a TV show version is you have 4 or 5 other main characters in the show as great characters in their own right. Chief Daisuke Aramaki was voiced by William Frederick Knight. This was the main role that I knew him from, but he's been in other anime here and there. But he's always kind of played the same guy, that really old, understanding, like, elder statesman kind of guy. And in this show, Chief Aramaki is the only person that can, overshoot the Major in whatever thought process. Again, that show of deference. He is an ace military strategist. He doesn't have the ability to go on ops anymore, but you can tell he's done all of that shit. He's lived through all of that shit. Think of the Major and Bato's military experience doubled, and you have this guy who's able to just think on his feet and has all of the connections in the world as this, like, political magnate meets military military wizard, and he's able to just get through red tape or talk to the people he needs to talk to, and then let the Major and all the people beat the shit out of dudes under his watch. But he's also, like, very strict, but also he understands who his team is. He trusts that they are the team, and he always obsesses over this team is the best people. And when he has moments of levity, he will say, I don't want other team members. I don't want to train other people. These are the best of the best, and if I lose any one of them, they are part of me. And you have that character to balance out the Major as this military mind that, again, has his moments where he can just show off his brain. There was an episode where he gets stuck in a bank by these 2 dork mafia dudes, and he just sits there and goes, okay, you can point a gun at me, I don't fucking care, but if you want to get out of this situation alive, you will listen to what I have to fucking say. So they do, and they survive, because all he had was his wit and his thought process. He, like, the Major was kind of there, but not really there. He just used his mental capacity and just said, I've got 3 or 4 people at my disposal. I've got this shit here. He MacGyvered his way out of a situation, and it's just amazing. So it's not like the Major gets all the fun. It's not like Bato gets all the fun. It's not like the others get their own episodes. Everybody kind of gets their own episode or 2, or if you're in the main cast, you get like 3 or 4 separate episodes to yourself. He has that air of superiority because he's lived through it. And it was really evident as watching the show. Bato, you can't have the Major without Bato, I don't think. And in every instance, except when Funimation had the license, Bato has been voiced by Richard Epcar. This is his role. This is his thing. Like, he is Bato. And he's done other anime and video games and shit, but he is Bato through and through. This big, burly, like, take no prisoners. I want to shoot a thing. I want to kick the ass of a thing. But he has a skill when it needs to think philosophically. He's able to, like, go through the mental mind of like a villain, like what they're thinking about, what they're trying to do, what the world is trying to do in a political sense, like what the world is doing. He's not an idiot. As big as he is and as burly as Bato is, he's not an idiot. He's not as, like, skilled as the Major is, and that does come to a point sometimes, but it's like Bato can hold his own and does. He is kind of the second in command and shows it. He's able to hold his own, whether it be a fist fight, a firefight, or, when he needs to talk through a thing and get somebody understanding the situation. He has a groundedness that I think the Major doesn't. The Major is a bit more philosophical and tends to think on the abstract. Bato tends to think, well, this is the abstract, but here is the down-to-earth ramifications of the topic that we're discussing. I remember him and Togasa in an episode in the second season. They were sitting there talking about, tofu and fake food, and his line was, just because you've changed who you are doesn't mean you still don't have yearnings for the things you used to have. Just simple, subtle lines like that, or being a fan of a boxer that he's having to tail because of a mob deal or some shit. Like, he is intense. The Major is intense, but you can't really get the emotional concept. Bato is intense, and he lets you know it. He is hard on his sleeve all the time, and it does balance out. The last main character in the I'd say the human side, I suppose, is Togasa, voiced by Crispin Freeman. And again, Crispin Freeman's done pretty much every goddamn voice on the planet. I don't need to recap it, but Togasa is all human. 1 second, get some water. Togasa is all human, all natural. He has a wife. He has several kids. He has a revolver. He doesn't seem to fit in this prosthetic world, but he has military capabilities. He's a sharpshooter. He's good at tailing people and, stopping crimes and stuff. But he always seems to get himself in situations, whether it's trying to suss out these underground problems with, like, nukes and shit, or he gets himself on trial because he shoots a mob guy in an alley who was trying to sexually assault a woman, so he gets put on trial. And you see him kind of fumble around. He doesn't have the self-assured, like, know-how. He doesn't have the knowledge base that the Major, the Chief, Bato have. So he's not as well versed in, okay, what are the political machinations? What are the problems that my situation is going to revolve around to? He's able to be, like, half grunt work, half, humanistic. His role is to be the human element of all these, like, super powered military dudes. He is the human element. He is the guy who watches TV when he goes off the clock. He's the guy who calls his wife and says, I'm not going to be there because I got to do this fucking mission. So Togasa's great at giving you a human element in this otherwise unhuman situation. And there are other members of Section 9, but I can't really... They don't add as much as the main four. So what I will do is talk about the Tachikomas instead. So the Tachikomas are gigantic, like, bipedal or multipedal robotic tanks that have AIs, basically. AIs in the form of little girls. And they have the knowledge base of little girls. They have kind of a cohesive mind, but they're all separate. And part of the show is these 4 to 5 different Tachikomas. Some are Bato special ones, some are not singular Tachikomas, they all provide protection for each member of Section 9 and in a military capacity, but they're curious. They're curious characters. They don't conform to what Section 9's doing, but they have their own like mindset. They're an exploration of what AI can do as developing creatures, and the Major has to deal with them building their understanding of the world, but also be like, are they really doing the right thing, or are they not doing the right thing? So the AIs talk amongst themselves over and over in these voices. Sherry Lynn, Melissa Fawn, Sandy Fox, Rebecca Forstadt, these like high-pitched girl voices, and unnerving, but they get these like funny asides every once in a while. They see this gigantic tank, that's like twice their size walking past them, and they go, wow. Or the Tachikomas like do a tag, like a wrestling tag, to just do tag team shit to say, hey, your turn now. Or they're just singing. They're just singing on their way to being indisposed or whatever. They don't have the concepts of, death and whatnot that the other characters do, but they still learn about these things, and it's a cool counterpoint to all these high-end military dudes. You have these like AIs learning about the world, and their curiosity gets the better of them, and they get a lot of time to express, comic relief without it coming off as ridiculous, because they are comic relief characters, but at the same time, they have a purpose in showing you what this world is. And when we talk about the world, we're talking about 2030. We're talking about not too distant future, and this was made 2004, so bear that in mind. But internet in your heads, you could see people talking to you through your heads. You can do a chat room with actual physical avatars. I mean, we have like virtual avatars in a way, but we don't have our consciousnesses and stuff talking with them. The closest we have is stuff like Skype and Zoom calls now. But eventually we're going to develop, like we've developed internet in our sunglasses or some shit. I know Google has come up with that shit. Internet in our sunglasses with headphones and shit. We have VR headsets, but we don't have VR headsets that can like instantly, download data like the Matrix does, like I Know Kung Fu, that sort of thing that Ghost in the Shell does. The internet inside our heads or inside our necks that we can see without a monitor, but we have computers and shit still, but it's all in our heads and our brains. And Section 9 is tasked with cyber warfare, but military warfare too. So you have high-end weaponry, nukes, you have guns, you have cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, all of these things. And they do a good job of making everything fit in a neat package, because what they focus on with the 52 episodes is a standalone episode, which can be a character-driven story, like, hey, we've got a Bato episode and he's tailing some guy that he was a fan of, or Togusa's on trial for a thing, or, Pazu, who doesn't really get much screen time, has to face off against an old lover, who went obsessed and started killing some dudes. That sort of thing. So you have those individual episodes that either focus on the characters or are just there to build up the, hey, we're Section 9 going on these missions, versus the complex or the individual episodes. And each season has these markers. When you're talking about the episodes, if it's a standalone, it kind of just sits there. If it's a complex episode, it's the main storyline. There's like 10 to 12 of the episodes that are of the main storyline, and those storylines are pretty in depth. The first season is the Laughing Man incident, or Laughing Man case, and it was a cyber terrorism sort of thing with a ransom notice. This guy abducted a micro machine manufacturer, think nanomachines kind of thing, and said, your stuff is bogus. This makes no sense. We should be using vaccines. Think now how vaccines are still a thing that people don't want to take or whatever. I'm not getting a political ass argument of it. It's an allusion to the story where the guy who is supposedly the laughing man, or just the guy who abducted the dude, was like, this vaccine works, your stuff doesn't, stop what you're doing. And it causes this whole thing with like cameras in their heads, like robotic cameras and surveillance things in their heads called interceptors. And Section 9 is called in to deal with like who's the masterminds for all these things, and why is all this shit happening, and who the hell has all this power to keep fucking with Section 9. So the closer they keep getting to the truth, the closer they keep getting to the supposed laughing man, all these little like plot threads keep going, and you start learning about the whole Murai vaccine versus micro machine therapy, and you start learning things, and you start seeing what the major, Bato, the chief, Tokusa, all of them go through, finding both this guy, but finding the ringleader of the actual terrorism. And it's an interesting season-long arc that is interspersed. So they don't just, near the end of the show, like the last 7 episodes or something, they focus in on the Laughing Man case, but they intersperse episodes here and there, almost Bebop style, like how Vicious would show up at like episode 5 of Bebop, then wouldn't show up again until episode 12 or 13, then he wouldn't show up again until 20. Same idea. You might go 4 or 5 random episodes of jack shit that are character-driven stuff, and then get back to the Laughing Man for an episode. Then you'd wait a little bit, you get 2 of them. It's an interesting way of like keeping the narrative in your head without having to force feed the narrative every episode. So you get the Laughing Man case, and you get the set episodes there. And then in the second season, you have the Individual 11. The Individual 11 is less cyber warfare and more producing a scenario where a nation is trying to harbor refugees, and they do so via nuclear weapons. So a lot more forceful means of taking over rather than cyber warfare and, you know, political machinations. These characters start to take on a little bit more, I'd say, gravitas, because they lived through the Laughing Man incident, and you have these different type of characters that are either more like physical oriented or just mentally. They took a look at the Laughing Man incident and said, what can I do as a villain or a hero, and work through it. And they're also working with, I think the thing in the second season is they're working more with the political machinations and the political intrigue side of things, because they're actually working with the prime minister at that point. Section 9 is such a big deal that they're like personal bodyguards to the prime minister, who herself is an interesting character, a female prime minister voiced by Barbara Goodson. I was impressed, like how good of a character she was, because she gets across this in over her head figurehead type of character who is just stressed out by life. I can relate to being stressed out by life and hating it and not making the right decisions, but having this elite team to fall back on, not for the sake of my political career, but to making the right decisions and finding the truth. And again, who are the masterminds? Who are the evils in this world of cyber warfare and, you know, nuclear weapons? So both seasons have different ways of going about the same concept, trying to figure out this world and its machinations while still providing peace and security as a military/stealth operation. The show's design, we'll change topic here. This show's design holds up really well, even though it's still a little on the stiff side. And that's what I will say, is Ghost in the Shell is very stiff. And Standalone Complex specifically is very like early 2000s attempts at CG. But they go at a very like deliberate, stiff, almost clean style. Everything seems a bit slow. Everything seems like it's moving at half speed, and everything's kind of like, you're not really having an action scene until you need to have an action scene. Everything else is them talking. If that's not that type of show, if you're not into that type of show where it's 75% talking and then the last 5 minutes of a cutscene is them, going through a military operation, it's more about why they're doing the operation and how they're going to do it, and then spending a couple minutes actually doing it. They limit the action scenes to, say, finales of episodes or the finales of seasons, big blow-ups and dust-ups and shit. I don't know if that was a budget concern. I think it was a personal preference on the creators that they wanted to focus on the mental and the character aspect rather than, hey, we're shooting dudes, hey, we're having fun. This is not a fighting show. This is them thinking through things. This is The Matrix, right? They're giving you characters and they're giving you motivations as to why they want to do these operations and what it means. It's very stiff, but at the same time, it feeds the narrative of this futuristic world that these characters inhabit. And it's reminiscent of those hard sci-fi things that you would see, like the Blade Runner kind of thing, but in a cleaner, like very bright way. This isn't like a dystopia. This is a very bright and dynamic looking world, very colorful, like a lot of whites and greens and blues and grays and stuff, but they're all like popping out of the screen. The characters all look distinct. The cars look distinct. Everything feels like it should, like it has some weight to it. But at the same time, it has this distinct sense that as it's animating itself, it's very stiff. So it is ever-present thought that everything they do doesn't have like a spontaneity. Nothing in this show is spontaneous. Everything in this show is deliberate. I said the word procedural, and I mean it. This is a structured show to a fault. And then we'll talk about the negatives. Again, slow. Some of these episodes are very goddamn slow. Because there are some shows that, like some comedies, like you could put on the background and it doesn't even, it flies by. Like Konosuba as a comedy, it doesn't feel like 20 minutes. Like American cartoons, they go by 20 minutes. And again, comedies are going to be different than dramas. This is a strict drama / thriller, detective, military show. So it's going to be a different feel, a different vibe. But even on the standards of something like a Psycho-Pass had more like horror aspects, drama aspects. This is like, we are going to tell you what we're doing every step of the way. We're going to tell you why this thing is happening. We're going to give you the backdrop for 60 to 70% of the show, and then we're going to do it. But at the same time, they're building the characters along the way, so it doesn't feel like it's, oh, the characters don't mean anything. No, the characters are giving you their interpretation of, well, why did this guy hijack this thing? And why did this thing happen? Like, who is this guy working for? All that shit. So everybody has their own interpretation of the stuff at play. And especially in the standalone episodes, when you get the characters to break down their guard a little bit, you can start to see them as people. The endings of episodes, when they're successful or they're on a cliffhanger and they haven't succeeded, because there are times when they fail, you feel that they've failed for a reason because their operation went fuck, or their enemy was a step ahead of them or better than they thought they were, stuff like that. So everything happens for a reason. And yes, it's very stiff, but in a different kind of way. Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is done in a different kind of way than most anime, which is why I still remember it, because I remember watching it 20 years ago. I rewatched it last week. It is the exact same feel. And if you're in the mindset for that type of deliberate pace, this is the perfect representation of. If you're not, if you're looking for something a little bit slicker, a little bit meaner, a little bit leaner, that is not what this show is. But when you get past that, when you get the positives, you've got the characters. And really, all of the characters are great. Even most of the supporting cast, the side characters, the Tachikomas and their comic relief. they're not supposed to be funny, and most of their stuff is not really all that funny. But the fact that they're talking tanks that are, talk like 12-year-olds, that sort of thing is pretty funny. Bato and the Major constantly fucking with each other because they're friends slash, they're not really love interests, but they have that in them. Yeah, they have that capacity, and then the Major and the Chief kind of have this different relationship. Togasa and his human aspects, his family, you get to see his family and his wife and kids all the time. They build on themselves, and of course, the Major. I spent so long talking about how good the Major is. If the Major wasn't as good as she was as a character, if she was infallible to a fault, then what would be the intrigue? If something didn't piss her off to the point where she blows up a fucking tank with her bare hands, rips open a fucking tank with her bare hands, or shoots this guy's armor off with a fucking sniper rifle, it wouldn't mean anything. You get those moments where she breaks through that shell. Like it says, she tries to show off this superiority, and then sometimes even she knows that she's not perfect. She knows that this Class A hacker is one step ahead of her, or she's a very philosophical person. It works so well because you have the time to build this. And I don't think, like, there were a couple scenes in the movie, in the original, where you had that. You had the scene with the Major and Bato in the ship in the pier, but this anime lets you dive into them a lot more and get the relationships bit by bit by bit, and then when things start to fuck around and they start doing little things you don't expect, it starts to show off the character's softer side. And then later on in seasons, when she starts to lose her composure a little bit, it starts to mean more, because you see that this character who is nigh invincible isn't as invincible as she seems. She does have subservience to the Chief, or at least a deference. A deference is the word. She defers to the Chief. She doesn't defer to Bato, but she has an equal like a sort of equal standing, like comrades in arms kind of thing. She's not against, making an idiot of herself. It's just that she's never the butt of the joke. It's always everybody else, but she's not above them. She just knows that she's good enough to stand there. But again, that comes across in the performance. Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, as I said, is the perfect person to get across this character being as strong yet as vulnerable as she is. And a lot of that has to do with the second season, too. A lot of the second season is actually about her growing up, or at least showing off different aspects of, ooh, she was this in 5 years ago? She was this 10 years ago? Cool. I get to see things from like a military op, and this is how Saito joined Section 9, or this is how she met Pazu, or like why she thinks of the Chief so highly, why she thinks of Bato so highly. And speaking of Bato, whenever he gets an episode to himself, the show kind of drops its guard a little bit, because it's been trying so hard to be this stiff procedural. But whenever Bato gets an episode to himself, they are some of the best. And even 2045, when he got an episode to himself, between Richard Epcar's performance and the episode itself having a bit more of a dingy crime feel, like a grimy grindhouse kind of feel. There's a specific episode, if you haven't ever seen Ghost in the Shell before, if you haven't seen the movie, you haven't seen any of the new stuff, you haven't seen the new movie with Scarlett Johansson, which honestly you shouldn't. If you've never seen Ghost in the Shell before, the episode I would suggest would be the 10th episode of the first season, known as Jungle Cruise. And I've been kind of alluding to the show, but I'm not spoiling anything. But let's just say this one I have to. This episode I have to, because it is the best episode of Ghost in the Shell, and best in the entire fucking property. Better than the first movie, better than anything they've done since. The 10th episode shows Bato as this military operative in, I think, South America, where the idea was that they would carve up locals in a disgusting manner to ruin their self-esteem and ruin their will to fight. And a guy who was there made his way to Japan and is continuing to do that. But it is done in a graphic way. It is done in a very bad way. And people are trying to stop the guy and come from America. And Bato is not having any of their shit. None of the Section 9 members are having any of that shit. But Bato specifically just owns this fucking episode. The fact that Jungle Cruise is as dark as it is as mature as it is a testament to a show that really played itself very straight up to that point. It had some, gore here and there, like you'd shoot off a guy's head or something, but nothing like we're hacking into the victim's eyes so the dude can show what he's doing to their bodies. He is mutilating their bodies and making them watch. And everybody has to recognize that and find this guy who has no redeeming qualities. This guy is a villain this episode. There is no reason not to stop this guy. And Bato and the Major and everybody else has to reconcile their emotional connection to it all to find a way to... Why is this guy getting away with this? It is graphic. It is disturbing even now. And I was 20 when I first saw it. I'm 36 now, and it's still a gripping episode. So again, if you've never seen Ghost in the Shell, never seen Standalone Complex, I implore you to look up Jungle Cruise. If that doesn't get you involved in Ghost in the... most of it would have been public knowledge. Ghost in the Shell is a big enough property that I'm sure everybody's heard of it and made up their minds. But if you haven't seen it, you need to see that episode specifically to see where this franchise can elevate itself to. That is the peak that this franchise can go to. And in conclusion, Ghost in the Shell is something that can go on indefinitely because of the way it is designed. It is not a capsule of its time. It can change depending on the technology or the mindset of things, social media being a thing and social media being a problem, or people having cyber implants or prosthetics or whatever. They can always change it and mold it and do different things with it. And again, if these actors age out or have to retire or pass away or whatever, you still have new actors. I've talked a lot about Elizabeth Maxwell, Sai Nijima, Winter Schnee from Ruby, Sai Nijima from Persona 5. She was the Major in a different movie. I could buy her being that character. You can find new people to keep this franchise going, even though, as I've said, the Standalone Complex cast is my favorite and will continue to be my favorite. And I think as long as they get to do 2045, I'm on board. Say what you want about 2045, and I'll probably get to that on my own eventually. The cast being as good as it is gave me a reason to watch. And it was because of episodes like Jungle Cruise, episodes like the Bato episodes, where I was just like, you know what? It's not perfect. It's got its moments of, can this episode end or something? But when they hit on an idea, when they hit on a villain, or they hit on a piece of imagery and a concept, and they show you why they're doing it and tell you why they're doing it and tell you why the characters are doing it, Ghost in the Shell succeeds at a high level. And it's still, to this day, really good. So again, check out Jungle Cruise, or even just watch the show. It's on Amazon Prime. Unfortunately, you have to pay for it because Amazon Prime is funny, but it was at $10 per season. That's $20 to watch 50 episodes. And for something this good, I had no problem paying that price. This is a high-end show. This is one of the few that I would put in the 9 to 10 category. This was one of my top 5 for so long. It still a top 10 show for me. And I have no qualms about saying that. But that'll do it for me today. And I believe next week we're going to be trying something different. And I believe in schedule wise, we're going to be doing Persona 5 Royal. Speaking of long episodes, we're going to be doing Persona 5 Royal next. But once we do Persona 5 Royal, I'm going to venture into .hack. And I'm going to do 4 continuous episodes on a couple of the .hack properties. Excuse me, of the 20 aughts. There were 4 specific things I want to talk about. Not everything in .hack, but .hack sign gets its own episode. The thing that really got me into anime, I watched other shows before .hack, but I wasn't like a fan of anime until I saw .hack sign one night on Adult Swim. I was like, yeah, this is my show. .hack sign, the original 4 .hack games, Infection, Mutation, Outbreak, and Quarantine, IMOQ, the quadrilogy, .hack Roots, which is the start of the second set of .hack properties, and then .hack GU, and specifically the .hack GU last recode version. Of those, .hack sign is the best, and .hack GU is definitely the better game, but each one of them will get a week to themselves. They'll get an episode to themselves, and they all feed on each other pretty well. So I did definitely want to do .hack, but I got to Ghost in the Shell this week. We'll do Persona 5 next week. God knows how long that'll be, but I'll try. You can already hear my voice kind of quiver at the thought. But I'm really glad I got to this episode, and of course, we're going to do more Ghost in the Shell stuff eventually. We're going to do the first movie. We're going to do the Scarlett Johansson movie, whether it was a good idea or not to do that movie. We're going to probably do the second movie, Innocence, Solid State Society. I want to get to all of that Ghost in the Shell stuff eventually, but I did want to start with this one, and I'm really glad I got to it, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode as well. But that'll do it for me, Citizen Strife, signing off.